All right, so for today's fireside chat, we have David Zwerin, and he is currently the Senior Director of Sales Operations at Iterable. He's been in sales operations leadership for at least 10 years, at least based on my look at his LinkedIn profile. And he's got a great wealth of knowledge on today's topic, which is capacity planning and headcount optimization. So I will go ahead and turn it over to Dharmesh and David.
Welcome, David. And I really was looking forward to this discussion for a while. I think you and I have traded emails on this topic, I think 6 months ago. So finally getting there. It'll be helpful sort of, I know Ashley quickly went over your background, but and I know you were at Trip Actions and prior to that, Druva. So all really fast scaling companies. So, I'd really would like to tap into that expertise and get your thoughts on it. So it'll be great if you could share a bit of your background a little bit, and on how you look at capacity planning historically, and then we can dive right into all the nuts and bolts.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's great to be here. So thank you for inviting me and talking about this topic, because it is it's an important one, especially right now. So, we're all in Q3 and starting to really think about it. So my background is, after leaving business school, I kind of found sales operations and field operations at a time when it was like a kind of an emerging role within growth organizations, primarily technology organizations, at least for me. So when I joined kind of a company called Lithium Technologies, it's now, it's been acquired, actually, and it's spun out. It's a whole other new company now. But my background has been in these kind of high growth organizations, SaaS businesses that have kind of varied in size and also varied in industries, but typically have always kind of centered around that kind of common go-to-market motion. Working at a Lithium, we were a Series C at the time and went up to obviously Series Z and then their exit. And same with a couple of other companies after that. So smaller companies, more mature companies as well. And then Druva, Trip Actions, and now Iterable. But the common thing that I really enjoy is at that place of the intersection of where the growth happens. So where does the company start to accelerate? How do you put a plan in place to think about increasing headcount with additional investment, or thinking about expanding into different markets, verticals, or other markets like geographic regions? So all things that companies contemplate kind of when to do that. And what are those things that kind of say now is the right time, or we're not quite there yet?
So as you think about this different stages of growth, right? So Series C versus Series E, do you see any difference in who's actually leading the headcount planning discussion, whether it's finance, or it's sales, or like how does it get started?
Yeah. Well, it can happen in Series C. It's like more around, it's a roundtable conversation that happens with finance, and it happens with the sales leader in terms of like how we can actually, go to market to create a capacity plan to hit some of our targets. Bottoms up modeling, how does that work? We really do need to think about segmentation. But if you're Series C, it's more of a kind of a collaboration around, are we ready? And not only are we ready from like an investment standpoint, but like the products that we have. And I know that this, is kind of a good common theme that's coming up in the market, is that, product readiness. Are we ready to actually turn on some international expansion? But the people that you really kind of, drive that decision are primarily the sales leaders and the finance leaders.
I was actually chatting with somebody else earlier, and they were talking about this company, which is probably now a Series D, maybe a Series E as well, fast growing. And they were in a board meeting, it seems, where the finance had built the capacity plan, the headcount plan, and they had forgotten to consider factor in things like ramp and seasonality. And, everybody kind of looked at the plan and they're like, oh, yeah, the sales leader was like, we don't, the numbers don't add up, because the person on the other side was a sales ops expert, like who's on the board, and it was him sharing. So it'll be interesting to like get your perspective, like as you really collaborate with finance, right? What are the challenges that you've seen for sales leadership and sales teams in general when they start collaborating with finance, that you would sort of caution people to think ahead about?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the inputs are really important in that model. So like, people like us, or I would say that the label often operations get is that, are you driving the business by a spreadsheet, or are you actually driving it by market conditions, or by like what's actually happening within your company and your culture? And I think oftentimes for me, like I do not like that notion of driving it by a spreadsheet. I've seen it happen at like private equity firms that come in and acquire a company, and they just have that financial model from an operations lens because it's so big. But when to kind of get more kind of into your question, the most important part of the inputs are things like ramp time. How do you think about being conservative, or are you being aggressive? Like, have we proven out that ramp, or is that just a modeling exercise? In terms of like, if you're bringing in certain kind of, let's say your mid-market reps, which is, obviously, between enterprise and maybe an SMB, do you have that right ramp in those assumptions? Are they actually kind of data driven? Or are you trying to get more aggressive with those? The other thing that's also really important is that, there's attrition, right? So one of the things that happen is that you actually have positive attrition, promotions that do impact capacity. Also, you have negative attritions of people who are leaving the business. And, that's common. That happens, obviously, is people do have, job career changes and, whatever life is happening, especially now during COVID. But one of the key things is that in those models, you have to be able to kind of really look holistically at all of those types of inputs and changes, because it can really throw off a plan.
So how do you get to that number? Like, so it's like ramp, like most organizations I've known, they'll create a ramp model, but generally, more often than not, they're actually not able to validate whether the ramp model is actually, the one that they'll have a general, like, this is my ramp model for AEs, like, period. Not like AEs for mid-market and AE for healthcare and like different domains. And so do you, how do you get data for that? I mean, do you spend the time spending more time with managers and really getting their feedback into the thing? Like, how does it actually work?
Yeah, we do actually look at it by segment because it's different. Because obviously, so what we have is we actually have key assumptions around kind of like our funnel metrics in terms of, average sales cycle length and, number of opportunities people should be building. And also, there's a, whole onboarding process of like, how do we think about them learning our product? And in every company that I've been at, it's that, there is a period of time that they're learning the product, the value prop, and they're not going to be effective for a certain period of time. So like taking kind of an enablement lens, but also taking kind of like the math lens of like how a sales cycle kind of works into it. And then you start modeling out what your ramp is in that segment.
So I'll take you back to your days of trip action. Trip actions grew like crazy, right? I'm pretty sure every quarter, whatever number that you had for the headcount plan, you were blowing through that and you were readjusting the plan.
Yeah.
Then came COVID, right? And it hit the travel industry really hard. So in that kind of scenario where you're like growing like crazy and, all coming down, either way, the plan is shifting, the market conditions are shifting so fast. How were you able to retain agility or keep at least the headcount planning process in line with the growth aspirations?
Well, that was a very different experience in terms of like keeping expectations in line, because I think what happened was the business reset. And it can all, again, we couldn't continue in the pre-COVID world of scale. There's just no way. Obviously, there was nobody traveling and there was nobody actually looking for travel management solutions. So the business kind of inherently had to kind of shift, for that moment. And that's a hard thing to do as a business, is to pivot. And that's kind of like what ended up happening. And I think, there are other organizations, like Iterable, where, when COVID happened, everybody kind of took a step back to see, whoa, what was going to happen with our growth model. And a lot of companies actually did pause hiring because they didn't quite know how long, in the beginning, how long it was going to take. So my guess is that, 90% of models, except for Zoom and, companies like, obviously that were in the service industry, DoorDash, Instacart, they went completely the other direction. Every business model had to pause to see, specifically kind of where the planning intersection was going to happen to readjust, and then take kind of the next step once you got kind of good indication of now is the time to continue on our plan.
So as you readjust, right, in our experience through the growth cycles or the change cycles, how frequently were you carrying out the readjustment exercise? Is it a quarterly thing? Is it an annual thing? And then we do check-ins? Or like what is the process?
Yeah, I mean, so again, talking about when COVID happened or just pre-COVID?
Either way, right? Because there's change in both sides. Like when COVID is happening, you're probably having the other problem. I feel that I'm under promised my capacity and I need to go adjust. And then when COVID happened, it's like fast adjustments to the other side.
Yeah. I mean, pre-COVID, it depends on, your business model. So Trip Actions, we were a monthly business. And so we were actually looking at things in a monthly cycle. Really important for us, like, how we measured a lot of things, especially around our hiring and go to market.
Yeah.
Post-COVID at Iterable, we did the same thing. We measured monthly, but we're on a quarterly basis, and we look holistically monthly. How are things trending? And then we make an adjustment if it's on a quarterly basis, like, nope, now we're ready, right? So, but there are always these fine-tuning kind of, I would say, meetings or whatnot that you would, want to make decisions to check in to see, like, how are we doing? We're hitting these targets, and then now is the time to kind of think, well, we're actually kind of at a place where we're healthy. These KPIs tell us that we're healthy, and we feel like, okay, now's the time to kind of re-engage our plan, and then start moving kind of conservatively into like the next phase. You never want to get too aggressive, obviously, post a pause, and how to kind of next steps.
What are some of the key metrics that you guys are looking at as you on a monthly basis, right? What are the kind of things that you're tracking?
Well, I mean, I think, ultimately, we want to see, what our, closed won, metrics around, obviously by segment, who we're actually closing and bringing on as new customers. So, obviously kind of what I would call top of funnel and bottom of funnel metrics. So, bottom of funnel, like, what are kind of our win rates and our average deal sizes, things like that are important. And then top of the funnel, we want to think about, like, what's the volume of demo requests or leads that are coming through in our website traffic, that kind of from a marketing standpoint. And if we have a lot of, obviously top of funnel interest, those metrics start translating down funnel to conversions and, obviously more conversations and meetings about our company and our offering.
So how deep did you go? Like, who are the stakeholders? Did you loop in the sales managers to get input from the field for assumptions and everything else? Like
Yeah.
how it's only a finance driven exercise?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's critical. Like our sales leaders are the, front line, right? So we have sales leaders, we also have sales managers, but like those two levels are part of that feedback loop of, what are they seeing on their team? What are kind of the deal cycles? What are they, what are they starting to kind of reveal? From a recruiting standpoint, they're obviously always talking to their networks in terms of like, changes and movements. So they really have a pulse of like actually what's going on. The other stakeholders that are really important are also, like our head of marketing. They, obviously have a very strong pulse in terms of, what's starting to happen, from an awareness standpoint. I think a marketing arm really helps, obviously, for us kind of drive brand recognition that's out there. And if we're kind of doing more and we're engaged with more analysts and we're doing obviously those right things, the market's starting to kind of come at us, and that really helps kind of us start to kind of on the sales side get kind of those other inputs from the sales managers to feel like, wow, yeah, there's a lot of conversations that are happening and there's a lot of good interest in the market about our product.
Yeah, I think that's such a vital part, right? Closing the loop with the managers and getting this is as much a little bit of an art and a science, right? So like you got to get their input into the numbers. Like I said, if you run it like a private equity, like an Excel driven model, yeah, well, then we can say headcount planning is not super complicated. It gets complicated because of these nuances of getting managerial inputs. I think the part of there is, are you running all this through Excel spreadsheets?
Our modeling, it's typically, right now through a spreadsheet or, or a plan. We're starting to think about planning tools, but mostly it's been out of a spreadsheet now. In other companies, we've used other modeling tools that kind of help us think about capacity planning and scenarios.
Okay. So as you think about this, like the other part is like, yeah, let's say you get from 100 to 150 people, right? And then I have managers saying we got to have 50 more reps. 50 more reps. That's one part is the headcount part. Now everybody needs a book of business, right? Yeah. And so now the next question of like, how do we give them the book of business? Like, are we recarving territories, right? And reps get really, really sensitive, at least from my experience, when you take accounts from them and it's their emotion attached.
Yeah.
So how do you manage that process of communicating to them that not only this is the headcount number, but this is how it impacts you?
Great question. I mean, I think that it is a very common conversation to have with the field managers, the directors, about how you build trust, about what does make a fair territory. Like, what are the characteristics that say I have enough accounts that I can have in my book of business that I think I could be successful in hitting my number. And I think the feedback loop, again, this goes to at Iterable, we spent a lot of time listening to all the different managers' feedback. There's some that want to be involved and some that obviously that are more transactional. These are the markets we want to go after. So there's some obviously some data points that are behind that, but it's a great question. I think that every segment, especially if you're working with enterprise reps, they've been in kind of their market for several years, and they really kind of know the conversations that they've had in the past. They know the brands, they know kind of like who the buyers are and what the use cases are going to be. And so they do have kind of their own signals to say, like, in our industry, we have customers that sign 3 to 5 year contracts. Like, where are they in that cycle? So they kind of understand that, they can't break those contracts. And so how we think about putting together, an equitable territory is a combination of, here are these, ICP fit accounts that you haven't had a conversation with. And we're going to start, building out obviously an approach in your territory to figure out how to, have conversations and then ultimately bring them on. But again, those are like, every kind of segment has their own way. I would, say like where we have to figure out what equitable territories look like. And then as we grow 50 more, in that segment, here are other industries that we're going to go after. Here are these other accounts because, they're now high fit. And especially in COVID, like we've seen, our marketplace organizations, I would call like a marketplace like a DoorDash. It's a conglomerate. They've proliferated. They've become a huge organization because it's a service industry. And these other, organizations that are kind of following in their footsteps have now really started to emerge. And like, those are the trends that we want to think about as operations. Like, how do we bring in those new accounts and how do we start showing that, they're going to need our product to, continue to grow and scale as their business starts to evolve.
I think that's a great one. And I think you just hit on all the things that I feel passionately about, because that's the biggest distinction I see between a finance-led process and a sales-led process. Like a finance, right? It's an Excel-driven process, and are not able to capture the, like you said, the enterprise rep. He knows his territory. He knows the accounts that are going to buy. He knows the propensity of those accounts, and you need to have that input into the process. While we build the number, and so one that actually just leads me to one data point is like. Historically, have you seen any difference between attainment, rep attainment in a finance-driven organization versus a place where sales operations driving this capacity planning discussions?
Yeah, I mean, in a finance-led organization, it's a little bit more of a mature model. So you not only are going after new customers, but you're also going after expansion.
Yeah.
And a finance-driven model can sometimes really help drive what we think, an expansion can be. So like the initial use case was they bought their first product, they may have 3 products, and they're like, hey, these are good fits from a white space planning perspective. We think we have this TAM. Let's go put a headcount against that. And then, people can overperform, through not only new logo acquisition, but also the ones that they initially sold expand. And that is absolutely a great way to grow, grow like a footprint of, your organization. Now, like the sales led, planning perspective from a sales ops or revenue operations team, if you're going primarily off of, new logo acquisition, it's a little bit more of a different planning cycle in terms of what I was talking about. Like you're still like figuring out right routes to market. You're still like, you're going from, low maturity to mid-level maturity in terms of your product and your organization and, your awareness in the market. And, those are, those will be, I think, successful just as the other ones, with a flywheel effect of like you need to have marketing kind of working, you need to have sales doing the outreach, you need to have like hopefully you can have a partner agency team or BD, whatever you want to call it, and have that kind of that real good go-to-market motion that could potentially create that over performance in a kind of that sales driven model.
Okay. So actually, then one of the things that'll be really helpful is for people to understand is like before we started this call, you said there's an order of operations that's really critical, right? And so as you're now running the process of Iterable, or even we are in Q3, like you mentioned, how early do you start the planning process for next year, and do you view it as only from a next year's perspective, or a couple of years out? Like you probably have a growth plans defined. So what's the order of operations for you?
You can never start too early, and we're already so we're in a fiscal calendar. We're Feb through Jan. So our beginning of the year is coming up in February 2022. So for us, like, we're starting to really think about, the order of operations now. And it starts with, really looking at the data. Do we relook at our ICP? Do we look at our do we look at kind of like what potentials are for expansion and other markets? Just like again, this is the time to really spend doing your data kind of research, and putting in some potential tests. This is the time to try things out, and then in earnest, October starts, and we're kind of starting to be really deep into planning and data acquisition and data cleansing, and kind of we're off to the races from a planning perspective, and having the right conversations about what should our strategies be.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, you can't start too early, and at least give yourself 3 months at least to get you where you are. And so, as you've been at Iterable for a little over a year now.
Yep.
And so, have you seen reforecasting being done or replanning to be done as you start looking at growth assumptions, or is it like you have a plan at the beginning of the year and you guys are tracking to the plan itself for now?
We've been kind of on plan for the year, and actually we've had amazing growth quarter on quarter. So we actually have a really fantastic story. So for us to replan, it's to do more, and so we're in a really unique situation, because our inherently like our business model is we're helping organizations, like I mentioned, like a DoorDash, who is growing like crazy, and they're obviously they have a customer life cycle, and we help power that customer life cycle from a marketing and awareness standpoint. And I think what happens is that, like, it's the planning process and the tuning that happens is, we're in a we have kind of all the dials, and now we're just fine tuning it and kind of figuring out where do we want to kind of swim to next.
So as you've experienced both an Excel-driven process, and like I was telling you, like an app-driven, or like some sort of application-driven process, what are the challenges that you've seen with either of them? Like both the Excel one and even the app ones. What are the gaps?
Change is going to happen. So you plan for everything, but change is going to happen. It's like, as we planned last year, how things are working now, we should, you should always have a static plan, and then the actuals that kind of come with it. So like, how far off and how far or how close to the pin did you get? And that's really important for the Excel model that you put in place. Like, you really do want to kind of keep like that static. The formula driven through a tool is there are a lot of scenarios that can happen, and sometimes in those the models that you kind of put in place, you kind of talked about in the beginning of the call, like, you don't take in some of the assumptions of churn or promotions. Like, again, you may say I'm going to grow 50 reps, but actually 10 of those reps are going to come from promotions. What happens to their backfill? So in those models, you don't typically account for that. And at Drip Actions, we saw a lot of, like, we promoted people, and which was amazing to be able to do, but like, you don't realize that when you promote people, you can lose $10 million in capacity, sales capacity a month, without kind of planning kind of the backfill, in time. And that's expensive to like backfill them with people to get ramped up to prepare people to promote, and come in and take their seat. So, again, it's a game of scenarios and how you can manage it.
Yeah. So as you think of technology and both, like, moving ahead, right? and this will be super important for me personally, because you're kind of building that module, is what are the kind of things that you would like to see, that you think technology should be able to sort of do it, right? These are things, low value added tasks that you think, like, hey, free us up from this, that you think will become game changers for your team.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's giving us some scenario planning, which is, I think, kind of some of the things I was just calling out. Helping us with, getting more data driven around ramp time and the assumptions that kind of come with, building out a model. And then also taking kind of more of the kind of the metrics, if you will, and building that into, if you've got a capacity plan, you have to make assumptions on productivity.
Yeah.
So you would want to think about, like, if we had this productivity, how would this work? How many more heads would we need to have? And the outputs that, like, really, we drive in our own models is making the assumption of, if we had 70% attainment, what would that be, right? How many more heads would we need to have? If we had 80%, which is actually all-time high, but like, how would we operate? Then taking kind of those assumptions and then helping us think about, as you know, in SaaS, it's not just the sellers that are impacting kind of your headcount planning. It's the overlays. It's the people in our business. We've got SDRs who actually do a lot of the outbound calling. We have inside sales that do the inbound, but then we have solution engineers. So how many people does that add from a kind of a cost burden to the business as we add more people? Operations, I mean, you name it. There's other parts of the business. So the tool and the things that we would really want to look for is, how do you think about that whole picture and the cost to the business as it relates to kind of our efficiency and our go-to-market? So, like, we really, like, how we measure everything today is, like, if our win rate is, below a certain line and our average deal size below a certain line, we're inefficient. And we want to know that. And especially in the planning cycle, it's like, hey, we all agree that this metric is really important for us. And then we need to figure out why. Are we going after a deal or the wrong market? Or do we need re-enable our team to think about value selling, and how does that work? So the tools need to be able to really help instrument where we are going to need to measure our efficiency going forward.
Yeah, no, I think that's great, because you hit something you call it as a, like, what are the cost of all these resources? And I think we've taken that same approach of thinking more from a return on investment on each of these resources. So I would love to sort of spend some time with you, showing you how we're thinking about building this up, because I do see this thing, once it's done, impacting the territory piece that you have, right? So on that note,
Telling me on a webinar?
yeah, we'll do that separately. But what do you think are the low value tasks that you see your ops team really getting pulled into as you think about headcount planning and stuff like that?
Oh boy. That, I don't know if it can replace it, but like, a lot of our ROE conversations are painful. I wouldn't say they're low value, they're high value for the sellers, but they don't really help us as a business. Like, again, we want to reward people, obviously, who do the work, and if they get promoted, how they get to carry a deal through. So some of the low value tasks, I mean, again, are it's kind of hard to kind of put it in a bucket, because it means something different to everybody. One of the big things for us is, like, it's just data enrichment, data cleansing. Those are, I wouldn't say low value, but again, those are just high maintenance, but low value back to us, because it's like, we can't, even though we can give the rep as much information about employee count, all the other things that are important about like how you set it in the territory and do it the right way.
Yeah.
We can't tell if that company's ready to buy or we've done the right awareness and marketing. It's just like, it's hard for us to do.
Yeah, that's a lose battle, because like we've seen that when I was at Salesforce, we used to give employee counts and all those things that you created territories, but no matter what number you gave them, the rep will not agree with it. They will just say this is and they have the final truth. So I think you got to create a system somewhere where they have a stake in the input, and then you hold them assumption true to that. So that takes me back to the other point you talked about earlier. Uh, like you said, the trip actions, we were losing about $10 million because of capacity issues.
Just that was a random number. That was just
So because of promotion, right? Because that's a good thing that's happening. So it's backfilling takes time, and you got to sort of figure out how. And of course, you can have all the best models of saying I'm going to have a person enroll by X date. Generally, we're not able to meet that date, right? Hiring takes longer. So what are you going to do during that process? If hiring took you about 2 months. So how do you work with the HR folks on those kind of things like succession planning and things like that to factor into the capacity module?
That actually is a incredible pain point. And it's so common in companies. Every company I've been at is like, if you're in a high growth organization, your head count of, hey, I've got these 10 people in this segment, these 10 people in this segment, and like we're trying to hire, but guess what? We're actually promoting people are leaving, people are, there's so many different ways people can move in and out of a seat. Yeah. You have to be able to kind of track it. And I would say, like, as a tool, should be a market out there for this tool to connect our plan, a sales plan, to an HR plan that can basically be able to say, here are all the changes that are happening. This is a backfill. This is when they should start. This fits your SLA if you're going to go recruit for, you have a 2-month window. Like, then, how far for an ops standpoint, and the sales leaders need this data. Like, they really need to know like what their plan is. If they're behind, or can they hire ahead? And so if we got that data front and center, up to date, leavers, hires, all that stuff, that would like solve a ton of pain, especially as high growth companies. And
that's great feedback, because I think that's the exercise that we were having, even though we're a small company. I started talking to our head of sales and saying, hey, we are behind on hiring. You can hire ahead right now, because that much budget that was allocated, don't use it. And we got to be ahead of it, because I think those hiring decision points and people getting promoted and out of roles impact the ability to meet your numbers and territories. Well, I think this has been a great conversation. We could go on and on, but any other final thoughts that you have on people who've just starting? Because like one of the things is you worked with a lot of different companies at different stages and scaling, right? So you got a lot of things that I would say is built up as tribal knowledge, and there is no school for these kind of things.
Nope.
So how would you sort of recommend somebody who's never done headcount planning? Like, what are the kind of things that you would tell him to say, hey, start with this? Like, you don't get super complicated, but just start with these basic building blocks.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, we have somebody on our team. We're kind of trying to, expose them to this. I think like coming in with like a skill set, really understanding Excel. And I think that's just a basic tool to be able to kind of come in, but really start to really understand, there's some playbooks that are out there from sales leaders that really help kind of actually give a good framework for how to build a great sales organization. Actually, it's kind of funny. I've got a book right here. The Qualified Sales Leader. It's John McMahon. I think you probably know who that is. I got sent this book, but really kind of getting a better understanding of like what is best practice around what sales leaders look to do to build world-class organizations, what are the models that they use? And if you think about it from a math standpoint and start to think about, how you add in headcount and what a waterfall looks like, what you start doing kind of as you learn, you start kind of piecing together, what does growth look like from an expectation of, an early stage company. And those are kind of the foundational things, is to really understand kind of sales process and sales methodology. And then starting to kind of look at, obviously the different ways and frameworks that, potentially kind of support those, those models. But there's nothing that replaces the hands-on approach, right? Where you get that opportunity to come in and just see how it's done, and you go through a few cycles, of it, comp planning, capacity planning. Those are like kind of the key things that really kind of give you the awareness of like, what a best practice looks like in this type of, industry, I guess you can call it.
I think that's really good. The Qualified Sales Lead, I think it's a great book. And in the reason, it took me back a few years, but that is, I think that's so important, especially in these VC-backed companies, because a lot of times when you're out raising money, your founders have already promised a growth path to the investors, and finance has a number to meet, and now it's your job to sort of go make or break the number. So I think leading with data and having a greater partnership with finance that says, hey, I've taken input from the feet on the ground, so we're not burning through people, is super important as well. So thank you very much for your time, and Ashley, thank you for hosting us as well. I actually look forward to having a separate conversation with David on this topic very soon. And thank you again.
Yeah, absolutely. If there's any questions, happy to answer those. But otherwise, thank you guys. This is great.
And what we'll do is we'll also take this this chat and share it, the recording onto the Signal Slack channel, so there'll be other of our peers who are there. And if they have any questions, they'll ask them to sort of reach out to you, David.
Awesome.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you guys. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Take care.
All right. Bye.